Welcome to the Sex After Kids podcast, a place for parents to come and learn together about the sometimes bumpy road back into the saddle of their sex life after adoption, childbirth, or joining a blended family. I'm your host, Sophia Ashley, certified sex educator and sex coach, mother and stepmother, and your totally TMI guide to becoming BFFs with your body and initiating easy and connected and confident, naked, sexy fun times. Here we are, one part science of sex, one part mindfulness magic, and one part straight up real talk to help you find the spark in yourself and your relationship after kids. I'm so glad you're here. All right, welcome, friends. This is episode number 1 of the Sex After Kids podcast. Here to talk all things naked, sexy fun times after kiddos. We're going to dive right into it today as I share the story of my evolving sex life through 10 years together, 1 stepkid and 2 kiddos that came out of my body, and share some of the key lessons I've learned through my experience that guide my perspective and my work. So there'll be some lessons for you here as you hear my journey and you hear more about me and how we go here. I am speaking to you today from the traditional territories of the Kwanlin Dun and Tonquichan Council, also known as the Yukon, all the way up in northern Canada. I lovingly refer to us as Alaska's cheeky neighbor. I have had the great privilege of growing up on these beautiful lands, as my husband was, and now we're raising our children here. A few housekeeping notes in our very first episode. It's important for me to share that I am a cis, hetero, white woman. My background is French and Italian. And I want to own and recognize the privileges that come with this identity, and I'm always opening my eyes to new ones. My goal in this podcast is to be as intersectional as possible, while also acknowledging a lot of it is me sharing about my own experience. I live in a house with a lot of neurospicy folks, and I have learned so much about neurodiversity and mental health over the last decade. I myself was diagnosed with Hashimoto's hyperthyroiditis after my last kiddo. This is an autoimmune disease of the thyroid, and so chronic pain and libido issues related to my condition are also a part of my journey. Maybe they're a part of yours too. I just think it's important to kind of give a lens of who I am and where I'm coming from. So what can you expect from this pod? It will be 1 part dispatches from my very own bedroom, 1 part science of sex, and 1 part embodiment. I take very much a head, heart, and soul approach to this work, and I want to encourage you to do that as well. It has been the magic for me in this process. All right, should we dive in? Let's dive in. If you are listening, maybe you can relate. So 10 years into my relationship, 2 babies, and 1 stepkid later, my libido was on ice. My youngest was inching closer to 3, and I was still not having regular sex by any stretch. And by that, I mean, it was very hard for me to remember the last time I had done it with my partner. And it was very hard to imagine me wanting it in any form. Despite my partner's very regular attempts, his very verbal affirmations of my sexiness, which I would shrink at while I grabbed my little post-baby pooch, and our overall good connection, I could just not find it in me to care or to put the effort in most of the time when it came to our sex life. When I did, it was generally on the condition that he did all the work, which meant even if it did end up turning my crank, lots of times it didn't, I would feel guilty and ashamed at my laziness and lack of interest and effort. I didn't feel like I was being a good partner. With 3 kiddos in the house, 2 under 6, we spent most of our nights apart, cuddling small children instead of each other. I'm sure you can relate. And working 2 full-time jobs and managing a neurospicy household and all of life's demands, even with the help of grandparents, and I know lots of you are not so lucky, we were lucky to get moments of laughter and connection between cleaning the kitchen and making lunches for tomorrow. And even luckier still to get moments alone that were private to de-stress, chill out, and tune into who we are as humans and not just parents on an individual level, right? Still, there was something very different to this current flavor of not wanting sex that was different from earlier stages in my relationship or earlier postpartum periods. So I want to rewind for a second and go back to the beginning of my relationship with my now husband. I was on the cusp of 31 and I had desperately wanted kids since I was about 25. And I met an awesome dude with a 4-year-old kiddo who wooed me with a trip to the cabin, moose meat steak, and political conversation. And that was pretty much it. I was in. The early days of our relationship were pretty typical sex wise. So lots of novelty and discovery. But as soon as we moved in together, I remember having this moment where I realized that I was in married with kids sex land. I was used to sex anytime, anywhere, typically once or twice a day, and that was not my current sex life reality because Saturday mornings weren't for lazy, naked lounging in bed. They were for waffles and Lego time because my husband was tired from mostly single parenting, because kiddo needed cuddles late into the night. So the privacy and the time and the energy that I had was different. And that was my very first taste of having a proactive conversation with my partner about the season of life we were in and what was going to work for our sex life at that time. So, what was the snapshot that we were working with in that moment in time? If we fast forward about 3 years and my very long awaited first daughter is born, as a first time parent, I had a fair amount of anxiety. My daughter didn't sleep well. She didn't eat well. She was exclusively breastfed. So I was on a 24-hour schedule and wasn't sleeping much myself. And there was always something to be worrying about. There were lots of factors shutting down my sex drive at the time, but I still had a desire for sex and for connection with my partner. Sometime in the first year postpartum, I remember we figured out that sex was a very important stress release valve for us, especially when resentment was rising and we were fighting a lot. And so we created a maintenance sex agreement, meaning we agreed that at minimum, once a month, someone had to tap the other on the shoulder and say, it's time. We weren't going for glory or 2-hour tantra sessions, just your basic get it over and done with session. But that really worked for us at the time. Yet again, an example of us talking about what we each needed and figuring out together what was going to work for us in terms of everyone getting their needs met. 3 years later, and a very surprise pregnancy later, my son arrived. And that was a very intense pregnancy. I'll probably share more about it in future episodes. There was a lot going on after he was born in our extended family. I started work at 8 months postpartum at the local women's center, which was amazing, but full. And my stress cup was overloaded. Another year later, and I found out that I had Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune disorder that affects your thyroid gland, and it causes fatigue and, surprise, surprise, affects your libido. I was having crazy PMS like I'd never had before. I just felt very out of touch with my body. I was overstimulated by two littles who wanted my attention all the time. I don't think I really understood the meaning of touched out until I'd had two kids. And when my naturopath asked me just how tired I was, I had absolutely no way of even answering that question because rest was not an option. My libido was not just dormant, it was completely on ice this time. I had zero, like sub-zero interest in sex. And the maintenance thing was not working for me. So instead of it being a connection and release valve this time, underwhelming sex was making me not want more sex. And I just didn't see the point. We would talk about it sometimes, this not having sex thing, but mostly I didn't know what to say and he didn't know how to help. So we just felt stuck, like I'm sure a lot of you do. We considered buying some online massage classes. I thought about reading some better BJ books. We talked about scheduling sex dates, but the drought just kind of dragged on. And the turning point came for me when kind of the weight of the proverbial elephant in the room just kind of became unbearable. Even as a trained sex coach, even as someone with the tools in my pocket, I was struggling to motivate myself to do the things until I had that feeling. And maybe you have had it too, of just kind of wanting to curl up into a ball and cry after sex because the weight of everything unsaid just feels so heavy and so sad. So many thoughts were going through my mind. I like to call them brain gremlins. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I couldn't imagine a way for it to get better. When we did try things, they didn't last very long because we were both so tired and stressed. It's supposed to be fun, right? Easy, natural, magical. So there must be something wrong with me or us. And aren't we all doomed to sexless marriages anyways? And besides, sex isn't that important to me or to my relationship. But my sadness was saying otherwise, right? I had all these committee members talking to me. And finally, my sadness was like, whoa, if I fast forwarded my marriage another 5 years of this, I did not like what I imagined. And one day I just said, that's it, man. Ignoring this is costing me more than the risk of talking about it, even if I'm effing terrified of talking about it. And I reminded myself of all that I have learned and put into practice. So this time, when I tuned into what was working for me, I could feel that my body was seeking new and novel experiences, that less frequency, but better quality sexy time sessions were what I was craving in this season or this era. This conversation felt the hardest out of all three that we've had. I'm not sure why. I was really feeling quite sad and overwhelmed by the situation, I think. And that's when I had to coach myself. And I had to remember a couple of key things that I'm constantly reminding people. So, one is that we are not born five-star sex chefs, and that learning together is how we're going to make it better together. I had to remember that my body was not broken. It was talking to me and telling me what it needed, telling me I was too stressed, telling me I had a thyroid disorder, telling me I needed to support myself. I had to remind myself that I can't change what I can't talk about. And I wanted this to change. And I also had to remember that failing forward with games and play are the solution. Those first few conversations were not the easiest. They were not super smooth. They were awkward and uncomfortable. But I also relearned a lesson I have had a tough time remembering throughout my entire life. And that is that the big conversation you're putting off, it's not ever as bad as you imagine it in your own head. And actually, that conversation that you are avoiding is the way back to the connection that you are craving. I'm going to say that again. The conversation that you are avoiding is the way back to the connection that you are craving, regardless of the outcome of that conversation. And in fact, the first time we actually really tabled this convo after baby number 3, talking about our sex life and what we wanted and needed actually turned us on both so much to the point where we had a fabulous romp right afterwards. It was wild. So I highly recommend finding that courage, finding that fortitude, finding the words to talk about it. So, fast forward to today. I am not the sex goddess of my 20s. Scratch that. I don't think I've ever been a sex goddess, but a new version of me and of my sexuality is on the horizon. I am feeling more connected to my partner. I know how to create that connection very quickly when times are tough. We are having regular sex at a frequency that feels good for us because the number is different for everyone. And I know that we're on the path back to even better things. If I'm honest, things are also finally shifting as we pass the 3-year mark with our youngest. People are sleeping through the night. There's just a smidge more space in life, and that is helping us both to prioritize our intimacy a little bit more. And so I want to underline how important this is. Some seasons are just harder. And the first 3 years in particular do not leave us with a lot of room. But there is always just enough to keep tethered to each other so that when we emerge on the other side, when our kids are 5, 7, 10, we don't look at each other and go, who the F is that stranger on the other end of that couch, right? I am learning every day, challenging myself to confidently initiate sex again, to know how to shift a maybe into a yes, and to also feel very okay about my no's when they come. I'm working on shedding the guilt and embarrassment, as well as the shame and resentment. And when we get naked together, we generally have playful, fun, and easy connected times. And that makes my body want to come back for more. The most important piece in all of this is that I am learning how to create a party that my unique libido wants to show up to, and my partner's learning how to help me create that party as well. I know the same is possible for you because I have done it. I have done it 3 times now after 3 kids have entered my life. And even though I don't have a lot of time, even though I don't have a lot of privacy, even though I don't want sex most of the time, I'm still managing to make this happen. You will hear me say this again and again throughout this podcast, but your sex life is yours to create, just like every other aspect of your life. You can wait around for it to magically become what you want it to be, or you can show up for yourself and for your pleasure and see what magic comes from there. I hope there was something there for you today. Thank you so much for joining me for this very first episode. Make sure to like and follow. Make sure to share it with your friends. Find me over on Instagram at the Happy V Project, and definitely DM me and let me know what kinds of topics you want me to talk about and what you want to hear about on the pod. Very much love from Sophia or the Happy V. Catch you next time.
This is the part where we do the end bit, right? Okay, friends, let's take a mindfulness minute here. One big deep breath in through the nose and one big deep full body sigh out the mouth. Voila. Your nervous system says merci. Thanks so much for being here today. I hope your head and your heart have something new to consider. No husbands were harmed in the making of this podcast, and a big thank you to my husband for his sound help and original music compositions. Love you, babe. You can catch us on Instagram at The Happy V Project for tools, tips, and anecdotes. You can join the newsletter for weekly-ish dispatches from my bedroom, and head to thehappyvaginaproject.com to learn how you can work with me. Catch you next time.